Today I'm delighted to be joined by Sandy Begbie, former Global Director of People, Organisation and Culture Integration at Standard Life Aberdeen, Chief Transformation Officer at Tesco Bank, and since October 2020, the Chief Executive at Scottish Financial Enterprise. Awarded a CBE in 2018 for services to business and social inclusion, Sandy has been a long-term advocate of youth employment and social mobility, and playing a key role in the launch of the Scottish Government's Young Persons Guarantee Scheme at the end of 2020. He's the current chair of Career Ready, the national social mobility charity, and non-exec director of Place to Be, a national children's mental health charity. Good afternoon, Sandy. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Good afternoon, Mark. A pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
You've, as I reeled off some of your back catalogue of roles, you've obviously enjoyed a hugely successful career over the years. It would be great to kind of start our discussion by hearing a bit more about your own career journey and I guess how your interest in social mobility has developed over that piece as well.
Yeah, as I say, thanks, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity. So my own career has undoubtedly shaped, and my upbringing shaped my approach to both how I think I operate as a leader, but also my approach to social inclusion and social mobility. I was born into a working class, council estate in Musselburgh, and had a fairly average academic career, to be honest, at school. It's funny how life plays out, but I could have been talking to you, or maybe not even talking to you, in a very different guise had I joined the police force, as was my desire. But my colour blindness kicked in, and I wasn't able to join it on medical grounds, so I ended up going into banking. 1983, middle of a recession, was given an opportunity and took it. Didn't have the qualifications to do the bank exams, so which was the way you progressed in those days. So I took some additional qualifications and progressed on the back of that. But I think that, to your point, once I worked through banking, a couple of things that struck me as I started to build my career. One was the importance of trying to create something that is almost like a unique selling point with respect to your career and CV. And the thing I've always tried to do is to portray myself as a very commercial, business-led leader who happens to have a strong capability in HR or people, and using that as to differentiate me. And I've always tried to hold on to that unique selling point throughout my career. And secondly is to really learn about yourself as much as you can. And what I mean by that is really pushing yourself into really stretching and at times quite uncomfortable positions. And whether that's been, for example, I led the Standard Life business in China for 8 or 9 years, where it was moving out of banking after 18 years into utilities, whether it was moving into my first non-exec role with the Scottish Government in 2005, when, to be honest, I was 38 and probably too young for it, but I decided I wanted to learn something about myself and everything else. So the two things I've always sort of carried in my life, one is push yourself to really test yourself. You cannot have a career without injecting some risk and development. And then secondly, as I say, is really try and make sure that you are adding quite unique skills and unique attributes to your own profile. So those are the things I would say I've really learned about. As it relates to social mobility and social inclusion, as I say, my upbringing, I was in many ways, statistically, I shouldn't be where I ended up. I was given opportunities. I worked for some great people, and I worked for people who gave me a lot of coaching and a lot of support, and some have gone on to be mentors for me for many years. And I realised over my career that most people that you come in touch with in your life actually have the potential to surprise you. And that really plays into young people. I've never regretted to this day any young person opportunity I've ever provided to anyone. I think that they're a great source of talent, and I think that we owe it as an organisation, any organisation in a country, to provide our young people with the opportunities that they deserve, and we will not be disappointed by the outcomes that we achieve.
Did you find as you were kind of climbing that corporate ladder that there were less people from a similar background to you at those levels, or have you always found mentors who came from a similar background, similar working class background to your own?
I would say that as you progress, you definitely find fewer people with that background. I have worked with some great people who have almost an identical background, so it absolutely is possible. And there's certain sectors that I would suggest it's more possible to progress than others. There are great examples in certain sectors where they're just more open to people progressing in that way. As for my mentors, no, I've had mentors from a whole range of different backgrounds, so from that point of view, it's not necessarily been people with a similar background to myself who have been my mentor. But as I say, I think that in some ways, I would say we've almost gone backwards in social mobility terms, and I don't think COVID in the last 12 months has really done much to support or progress the social mobility and social agenda. And I think we'll look back and probably see that we've regressed in that respect.
Yeah. And was your feeling that it's gone back even before the COVID era and that's just pushed it further back, or do you think the reason that it has gone back is largely down to the COVID pandemic?
I think that despite so. It's a very good point, Mark, and I'm just going to be careful how I answer it. There are lots of great examples and great initiatives in the social inclusion and social mobility space, whether they are in the third sector, whether they're run by employers, or whether they've been public sector initiatives. You will find some great programmes that have had an impact. Yeah. The challenge, I think, for UK has been that we've never managed to come up with something that has a sustainable and material impact on social mobility and social inclusion. So great initiatives, great programmes, but actually collectively we've never managed to move the dial to the extent that we need to. So hence the reason when you look at some macro data around poverty, for example, yeah, or ACAT, the opportunities that present themselves to some of the most disadvantaged young people in society, whether you look at areas of the country that still suffer from significant deprivation, we've not managed to move the dial in those areas to the extent that we should do. So I don't think we were not progressing at the pace that we needed to pre-COVID, and I think unfortunately as a result of COVID then we'll have gone backwards. And those who were furthest in the workplace today are probably even further away from the workplace than they were 12 months ago.
I think that's an interesting point. I mean, we come from similar working class backgrounds and share a passion for social mobility, albeit you've been much more active than perhaps I have, or many others. But I think the general consensus from business is often that they have progressed and they have moved the dial forward. Now, I'm not asking you to get into specifics, but I think it's an interesting point and one that I share, that actually there is still an awful long way to go in this, an awful long way to go.
Yes, and that's why I was quite careful in that answer, because I think you could go to certain employers and you will find tremendous initiatives, and you will find a lot of great employers who have made significant inroads in their own sphere of influence into that social mobility space, and they should rightly be called out as being sort of champions and role models in that respect. But what we've not done is we've not aligned all of these things in a way that brings about that material change. And to be honest, we've not had a radical enough thinking around some of these. And in the Young Person's Guarantee report, there's a couple of things that I call out that I would say have and I know have seriously challenged some of the traditional ways of doing things. And I think that's what we need to do. We really need to challenge the system to basically think about its own transformation in order to bring about that change.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned the Young Persons Guarantee Scheme, and you've obviously mentioned it just now. And on the face of it, seems a magnificent, approach to moving things forward. For those, I guess, that haven't heard it yet, it's a guarantee that offers all young people the opportunity of either an apprenticeship, fair employment, including work experience, participating in a formal volunteering programme, training, or going on to further or higher education. What do you hope can be achieved from it, and how would you assess, I suppose, following on, how would you assess the first few months of its rollout?
Yeah, so I think in order to think about the Young Persons Guarantee, if we take a step back for a minute to think about what is one or two underlying principles that I think challenges the way that we've looked at this in the past. So one of the things I've called out, Mark, is that if we deal with this crisis from a youth employment point of view, as we would deal with every other previous crisis, then we're going to end up with the same outcomes. Research will tell you that every crisis, the young people have always been disproportionately impacted as a result. And we've not got time to get into all the reasons for that, but the research will say, same happened in 2008, same happened in 2000, etc. So their opportunities are severely impacted. The second one, which I think is quite fundamental, is really challenging the fact that actually the cost to society of keeping young people either unconnected or unproductive is substantial. And that cost is both financial, but also, arguably even more important, non-financial. The impact on people's well-being, mental health, self-esteem are significant and can last for many, many years. But the financial cost is not just the cost of keeping them out of unemployed through the benefits system. A lot of course, young people end up in the criminal justice system, or they also need support through the health system or through the social care system. Of course, some may unfortunately end up in the prison system. But we've got a supply that is just not sufficiently connected with the demand side. So you've got areas like construction, some areas engineering, some of the tech areas who are crying out for skills and capability. And actually, we've got young people who are going to be unemployed, and we've historically never been able to square that off. And I'm challenging people to think differently about it and take the money that we would spend keeping young people unproductive and actually putting it into the education system and actually giving them the skills and capabilities and experience that they're going to need in the future, and actually provide our economy with the type of skills that we need. So that's the kind of, I just wanted to draw that out because I think that's part of the challenge that I've posed for the Young Persons Guarantee. You're right, it's very ambitious. It's a guarantee to all 18 to 16 to 24-year-olds. And what we're really trying to achieve is to ensure that every young person is given the right opportunity for them. We launched it in November. We've already funded just north of 17,000 places, whether that's through existing employability programs in local authorities. We've funded more places at colleges and university. We've also funded more apprenticeships. And also we've also given more money to third sector to help reach the most disadvantaged young people with the type of programmes that they deliver. So that's 17,000 young people who otherwise would have been unemployed, who have now been given opportunities as a result of the Young Persons Guarantee.
I think I previously sat on the children's panel for a couple of years, and I sit on the board, of a Pilton Youth and Children's project down in North Edinburgh, one of the most disadvantaged areas of Edinburgh. And I think it's a really interesting point you make about the cost of not doing something and the cost of not getting this right, because the figures are eye-watering, as you highlighted. You could easily fund, I'm not suggesting this, but you could easily fund a boarding school programme for thousands of pupils to give them the best start in life, for the cost of what it would, for what it might cost them, even just in the criminal justice system throughout throughout certain people's lifetimes. So it always amazes me that that's not spoken about more, and that's not the real driver for policy. I mean, why do you think this has been the case for a long period of time? Why do you think this just isn't getting better?
It's a great question. I mean, and mine, I suppose, is observations from my career in a corporate career, and I appreciate that challenges in the public sector, and I'm no expert in the public policy space. But I think that I think there's two things. One is that the bringing about change, even within an organisation. Of course, I've led 3 transformation programmes, is difficult. Bring about transformational change into the public sector, into the policy space that impacts literally tens of thousands of people is substantial, and we shouldn't doubt the amount of effort that requires to go into that. I think that so undoubtedly that nature of transformation is challenging. I think secondly as well is that the world of government means that that there are portfolio changes, there are MPs and MSPs that will come and go. So the long-term sustainability of something requires long-term leadership. And I think that at times that's not always there, depending on the political climate at the time. I think one thing that Scotland does have, though, to its advantage, that we've not fully leveraged in this space, is our size. We actually are a relatively small country. We're 5.5 million people.
Yeah.
We can make decisions quicker if we put our mind to it. COVID has shown that we have got the capability of doing that. And I think where we've got the will and the energy to do it, I think, given our size, I think we should be using that much more to bring about that scale of change that's necessary. And given we actually are starting with some really, really strong component parts, we just need to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, and there are some that we need to build. But we are still in a reasonable position.
I think moving on to your new role at SFE, Sandy, obviously the pandemic has helped to take Brexit off the front pages. I mean, from a financial services recruitment point of view, we've seen very little impact, certainly in Scotland. I mean, what's your assessment of the kind of post-Brexit impact on the sector up here, and how do you see that developing over the next couple of years?
So I think it's been interesting coming into this role, because I was probably no more an expert on Brexit than reading the press like many other people. Yeah. And I think what I would say is Scotland versus London are quite different from a Brexit perspective. I think that London has particular challenges in that respect, given the sheer scale of the sector. Yeah. And secondly, in Scotland, is that if you look at the financial services landscape in Scotland, it tends to be populated with 3 different groups, one of which are financial services firms that predominantly service UK-based customers. So a lot of our banks these days are UK banks. Our life and businesses are predominantly servicing UK-based customers, pensioners. And therefore, Brexit, from that point of view, it's a factor, but not that big a factor. Then you've got what I would say are overseas banks who have chosen to set up in Scotland to access our talent and our cost base and our quality of life. So you've got the JP Morgans, the Morgan Stanleys, the BlackRocks, etc. In some respects, when you're talking about global US banks who are operating in 150 countries or so, then actually that's their business. They deal with change on a global scale on a daily basis. So again, it's not a huge factor. Then you've got the third group, who I would say predominantly fit in the asset management category, which are genuinely international and global businesses. The Baillie Gifford's and the Standard, etc. But they've been planning for this for the last 2 or 3 years, and they've set up what they feel is necessary, whether it's offices in Dublin or Luxembourg or whatever. And we've not really seen movement of jobs out of Scotland to service those offices. They tend to be local hires. Yeah. That doesn't mean to say that we're out of the woods. I think the full fall Brexit will take some time to come through. Could be another 2, 3, 4 years. And you can see that in some of the discussions on Northern Ireland and other things. So, interestingly, one thing I have learned is particularly from a bank's point of view, and I think the banks have responded to this pretty well actually, is their customers have had quite significant impacts as a result of Brexit, particularly exporters, and particularly exporters in food and drink. And therefore their supply chain and that whole exporting process has gone through significant change, and they've required additional facilities and managing cash flow interruptions and other things that actually the banks have been able to provide. So it's been as much an impact for some financial services customers as been for the financial services firm.
We've seen some movement of talent up from London, some roles relocated up to Edinburgh from London, and we've seen some internationally come over to Scotland as well. What does Scotland generally always seems to do quite well in terms of the inward investment tables. What do you think needs to happen for it to continue to be highly competitive and continue to attract functions up from other financial services centres?
Yeah, again, great question, Mark. I think the reason it's been successful in the past is because of probably 3 or 4 things that have come together. I think there's a supply of talent. There's a really good talent base in Scotland that we've built up over the years, and it's got a really strong further higher education system to support that. I think then you've got the quality universities and the ability to connect universities and research and other things. And some of the work that Edinburgh is doing in data, for example, is really world leading. So you do have that particular base. You've then got what I would say is a very competitive cost base. We've got a cost base both from a business but also from a cost of living for organisations' employees that's pretty competitive. And then I think also we've got a quality of life that in some ways, if we live here, we slightly take for granted. But you're in Edinburgh, I'm in Edinburgh. We can be down at the beach in half an hour. It feels like you're totally out in the city. That I think is actually, in some ways, COVID has triggered quite a lot of conversations internally amongst firms around location strategy. And I think that it has certainly triggered a lot of conversation around things like livable cities versus, the Londons or the New Yorks and the Paris. I think that's been triggered by both the business but also their employees to say, well, if I'm not going to be back in the office 20 days a month and I'm going to be in 7 or 8 or 10 days a month, then I don't need to live in London. I can come to London for 7 or 8 days a month, and I can live in Edinburgh, or I can do the job in Edinburgh or whatever. So now we shouldn't be complacent, because there are other very livable cities elsewhere in Europe who will be having similar conversations. But between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and we've got quite I recently interviewed some really senior leaders, and one senior leader who's the chair of a major bank, a global bank, said Scotland in some ways has a real sweet spot that brings together education, cost, standard of living, quality of talent, etc. And actually his comment was, we actually need to do more to sell that on a global stage, because it is something that we've got, together with a very stable regulatory framework, fiscal framework, etc. in the UK, we actually have something that is really quite attractive.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the sidebars of Brexit has been the ability to bring European talent over to Scotland. We've got a sizable international business at Change Recruitment, and we would have hoped to have seen a bit more movement, simplifying, I guess, some of the key skills shortages that exist in some of the professional ranks across the UK, whether that be in accountancy, areas of financial services, or in particular, I guess, technology. But we've not really seen much in the way of a simplification around the immigration policy. What's your kind of members' thoughts and feelings, and are there concerns around being able to attract talent from further afield?
Yes, so I think one thing as respect to Brexit has been definitely that as a live conversation. I think, and COVID in some ways is also a contributor to that conversation, Mark. So
yep.
If you think about universities, for example, we've got a large percentage of students come from overseas. We've seen a reduction in students coming from overseas to university in Scotland. Of course, a number of those students come to universities and end up being employed by some of the big financial services firms and professional services firms in Scotland. So there is a real concern around that, and then also the movement of talent globally as well is also a factor. So you've got businesses who would want to move talent to other parts of the world and likewise bring talent here. So we've got some really big American names that would want to have the ability to bring people to work here, etc. So the need for real clarity around that is something that definitely members are looking for. I would say it's not just Brexit, it's also COVID and the impact on people's desire to move as well, because we've got lots of situations where, and it's been quite interesting talking to some of our members about some of their graduates who have graduated from Scottish universities and been employed in Edinburgh or Glasgow, but they come from overseas. They've not been home to see their family for 12, 18 months in some cases. And that in itself has got some real well-being challenges for some of the firms. So that's not just Brexit, but it's COVID, but it just adds to that uncertainty about working overseas.
And I guess closing off, Sandy, hopefully we're just about at the back end of this pandemic, and things are close to getting back to the normal or the new normal, whatever you want to describe it. What are the causes? What are the areas for optimism that you see from a membership point of view and from a general kind of Scottish economy?
But the forecasts during the crisis, the worst forecasts never come to fruition. And actually, I've been struck by the number of businesses that have adapted their business model very quickly in a way that I think would have taken years to have taken place. So, and the number of new businesses that have also appeared, taking advantage. Again, going back to one of the senior leader conversations I had, one of the chief execs said that market disruption always presents opportunity, and while you're living through it at the time, it doesn't feel like that, but actually there are always opportunities that flow out the back of it. I think in terms of the optimism for Scotland, I think that, and we'll be publishing our financial services strategy in the next few weeks, I think we've got a real opportunity around that whole green finance space. So we've got real capability and talent. We've got a real opportunity to provide some real global leadership in that area. I think we've got a key role to play in the economic recovery in Scotland. We've got some great businesses who have had it really difficult the last 12 months, and I think the sector has the opportunity to really help those businesses redesign their business model and actually move into a better place. And I think more broadly, I think that in terms of the wider Scottish economy, I think it's been shown to be more resilient than we probably maybe thought. And undoubtedly government support has helped. But likewise, the new forecasts seem to be coming through saying it's not going to be as challenging as maybe first thought, but it's going to be really difficult, undoubtedly. But I do feel that we, both as a sector, working with other partners in government, I think I see a real alignment around people really trying to bring about meaningful change on the back of COVID that will help us recover.
Right. And I guess finally, for those people who maybe want to support the Young Person's Guarantee Scheme, how do they find out more about it, and how can they get involved in it?
It's a website, and you can go onto. We have a very quite simple model. We ask employers to sign up to sign up to 5 asks. They are qualitative. They're what all good employers would do. It doesn't tie them to numbers or whatever. What it does say is you're committed to young people, you're committed to fair work, you're committed to these. But what we're really keen on doing is engaging employers. This is a long-term change, Mark. This is not just a reaction to COVID. This is about trying to bring about long-term sustainable change in youth employment in Scotland. I'm pleased to say we're getting more and more employers signing up every week. But if you want to get involved, go onto the website, have a look, and it'll tell you how to get signed up. And I would encourage anyone who employs anyone to do it.
Fantastic. Look, really appreciate your time today, Sandy. Really enjoyed talking through some of those points. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Thanks.